Hey everyone, Temporal here. And for this session, we are looking at the groups for Homecoming. We're going to be taking a look at how everyone did, not necessarily how everyone did, but we're going to be taking a look at the groups that got drawn. They did end up using, fortunately, after a little bit of a scare, a standard seeding strategy where they sort of paired up the groups in a way that would be traditional based on what the seeds were from Swiss play here. So that's good, but we know we have, just based on comparing between our power rankings, which I will pull up here, our power rankings, which our most recent power rankings I did link in the description below. But I've since made some very minor adjustments. A couple of those were we moved around UC Santa Cruz and SCAD based on at the end of the video. We commented on that in the video. That's the pinned comment. We dropped Boise down because they just really didn't have a solid enough win to go there, and they did have the loss to both of these teams, so they actually slipped one spot behind the Bellevue here. And then we did go ahead and just drop Ohio State as well as move Illinois Orange to the front here. And that is because in NACE, separate league, but in NACE, Illinois Orange did in the rematch beat Ohio State here. So they jumped to the front of the good tiers team, and Ohio State falls down from about here-ish down to second in the good teams category. So that's what we've got. We're going to obviously factor those in as we walk through this, but we're going to be a little bit more freeform about this because we have some teams like SCAD who are going to have had a low seed but end up in a group with two other good teams. So we're going to make predictions of who's going to win each of these groups. I'll make my predictions, but you guys feel free to pipe up and chat over no, you think this team is definitely going to win, not going to win, the matchup is bad, anything along those lines. So I guess we'll start with Group 1. My image is in the wrong order here. But if we start with Group 1, this one's pretty easy. Redbirds are going to win this group. That's going to happen. And then UC Santa Cruz would be expected to get number 2 here. Maybe you see some action from one of these two teams. Maybe you see an upset. But I think this is a pretty easy group to predict who's going to win. We're pretty comfortable that this is what this one will look like. We'll then move on to Group 2. Strong belief would be that Bay State will win that group. I think it's a pretty strong belief that Northeastern will get number 2 in that group. That's not to say that UNT couldn't pull any sort of upset, Mizzou couldn't pull any sort of upset, but I don't think that's terribly likely. Northeastern hasn't run into Mizzou this season in official play. They have beat UNT twice in official play this season. So this should be how this group plays out. We'll go ahead and put this one here. Nothing too wild in terms of what do we have to predict, what are we thinking, that sort of thing. And these groups have seemed reasonable. I'd say this group was probably a little tighter than this group is in terms of Redbird just, going to slaughter everyone else ultimately. That's sort of reality. Santa Cruz, I expect to put these teams away pretty easily. I expect them to maybe put them away a little easier than Northeastern will put away UNT and Mizzou here, but not significantly easier. I think both of these are pretty open and shut groups here. Then we move on to group number 3, and this gets a little bit more interesting. University of Texas Dallas should be the winner. Drama surrounding them and their job posting at all. If you guys wanted to see the reactions to that, we actually did get the team. We talked to them a bit this morning as we went through the posting, talked about what the future of their program could look like. I did put that video, we'll link to it in the description below if you want to check that out, as well as in the description below, there's a link to the previous power rankings. Okay, so that's the easy one. The next, the smart guess here, sort of like, hey, based on what's happened, based on wins and losses, would be Waterloo takes number 2 here. But again, things get a little bit more interesting, not because, oh my goodness, Waterloo's so weak, they're really in huge danger of losing to these other teams. But again, Illinois Orange just got the upset and got the revenge win against Ohio State there. So that's meaningful. They're making some moves. We didn't put them in our making moves category, but that's potentially stronger than expected. And if we look at Winthrop here, they did previously lose to Waterloo, so that would be a thing here. They're potentially hungry for the revenge here. And then they lost to Converse and Bay State as well. So you'd expect that they're probably not enough to do it, but these don't feel like things that are massively behind these two teams here in terms of Waterloo. Maybe they are. Maybe they've absolutely got this locked down. Probably they do. I think they probably do, and that we're looking at these are the 1 and 2 here. We can pretty safely check this off. But the strength here is a little more even than we might have expected outside of our runaway leader here. I am ready for Waterloos to prove me wrong and just absolutely clean sweep it, not drop a single map, but I think this is a little bit more interesting as we go through here. Then we move on to Group 4, which we will scroll over for. And Group 4, this is our first, scary group. We look at this group and go, okay, well, who should win this group? Well, based on our power rankings, Irvine should win this group, and then Bellevue should get the number 2 spot, but Converse is not a joke of a team. They're not in any way a joke of a team. It wouldn't be weird for them to get the 2 spot in this group. Now, that could happen in the form of, it turns out Bellevue gets the 1 spot, Irvine gets eliminated, Converse gets the 2 spot. It could happen in the form of Irvine wins it, Bellevue slips up, and Converse gets this. Bellevue did slip up earlier this year and lose to St. Thomas. That's why they're not higher in the power rankings. So it was an illegal roster. We've covered this before, but that's sort of what we're looking at. So if we had to guess in this group, it probably does look like this. But this is not a slam dunk group. Sorry, Toronto. Toronto doesn't really have a chance in this group. There's no way through. This is probably what we're going with, but this would be a group to potentially watch for upsets. The most so far of the 4 that we've been through. There's 3 good teams in here, at least fairly good teams in here. So then we're going to go ahead and go through. Let's make that more interesting and scroll over to Group 5. And in Group 5, we've got Northwood, who will win their group. Northwood are going to win their group. That's going to happen. We know they stumbled. They took a loss to Texas Dallas last week, and that's huge shakeup. Very interesting. University of Texas Dallas with their 1 contenders player versus Northwood with their whole roster of contenders or former contenders players there, and Texas Dallas picks up the win. Exciting story there, definitely. We did review that match on this channel if you want to check that out. But then for our number 2 team, we've got, again, 2 good teams here. And we can definitely look at, okay, well, what do the power rankings say? And the power rankings are going to tell us that Waldorf should win this one. And Waldorf could win this one. It would not at all be weird for Waldorf to win this one, but this is another contested group where Orange I do not expect to keep up. They can throw teams off. They play a little different than some teams, and that can throw teams off. I don't expect them to slip out and manage to get the number 2 slot here. It will be one of these 2 teams. And even with the power rankings and all, I might be tempted to go with the Redhawks on this one. They're a bit of an inconsistent team, at least I've found in, last season, this season. But when they turn it on, they do quite well. And now that we're approaching playoffs here, I could really see them turn it on. Whereas Waldorf, don't get me wrong, they've done some good stuff, but they did take that loss within the last 3 weeks or so at a LAN game to the Bobcats, and that doesn't bode particularly well for them, even though they didn't massively fall in the power rankings. And then what we've also got for them is what's really holding them up great in the power rankings is, hey, some wins against Bay State and Northeastern that were basically beginning of the season at this point. A win against UW, who are solid but not amazing, and then a win against Lords, which was more recent. The win against Lords was more recent. But they don't have a ton propping them up, whereas, like I said, Miami, Ohio can be a little bit inconsistent themselves. Sometimes they turn it on, sometimes they don't. They do have that win against Utah. They don't have amazing wins behind that. Their losses are to Lords, University of Texas Dallas, and Waterloo. So I could see this one going either way. Even though the power rankings would go towards Waldorf, I actually think I'd predict Miami, Ohio on this one. But ultimately, that will be something very interesting to see. So far, I'd say Group 5 and Group 4 would be matches to watch this weekend if you've got some time to watch Collegiate Overwatch. In terms of, how is this actually going to go down? Then we get to Group 6. Group 6 is boring. Maryville is going to win this group. Boise is going to get second place in this group. That is what's going to happen. These are the 2 schools that are suspected of having intentionally probably lost their first 2 matches in week 1 of homecoming in order to land very easy opponents for the rest of the way through. It made their tiebreakers weak. It made their seeding not amazing. Carnegie Mill and Catgirls did end up beating at least a 4K team in Davis in the later weeks, so I've put them not like as the worst team in the power rankings, but we just have no information on UW Stout. But the reality is they didn't face any challenging teams on the way up, and that's mostly true for Carnegie Mellon Catgirls as well. Could they surprise us and actually be amazing? I suppose, but you're generally not going to have to resort to that tactic or even feel like you should resort to that tactic of, well, let's try to take some losses to give ourselves an easy path through for the remaining 8 wins if you're doing that. So the belief here, these two should pretty easily walk away with the wins here, and this is probably the least interesting group in here, in my opinion. The only thing that makes it more interesting is maybe these guys will surprise us and be better than we think. But I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. Then we move on to Group 7. Harrisburg would be the expected winner here, so nothing too surprising. Harrisburg, okay. And then we look at the rest of these, and based on our power rankings, it should be University of Washington. I don't know. University of Washington hasn't really had a ton to prove themselves on. Behind that, we would have Ohio State does have a win against Penn State, so we'd expect Ohio State to be next. But these all get pretty close to each other in the power rankings now. So if we pull our power rankings back up, we look at this and we go, what can we prove with who? And we can go, okay, so we've put Ohio State down here after their loss to Illinois Orange. We have UW up over here. They don't have a ton supporting that. Like some of that is, hey, they got top 16 last year. This is sort of where they got placed when we initially put this together. And then they haven't really given us too interesting matches to move them around. They beat Rebel. They beat Illinois Orange. Okay, so that is a piece there. They beat Illinois Orange, who Ohio State lost to. They lost to Waldorf, Bellevue, SCAD. Those all make sense. Don't surprise us too much. Okay, so they're going to go ahead and be here. Great. That's where we'll put them. Fine. But that's also not very far from, let me grab our third team here. What do we have? Ohio State. Oh, Penn State. So let's line those back up. And then Penn State doesn't have a ton of distance between them either. Now, Ohio did beat them earlier, so I do expect that if we have to look at this, we're looking at a case where Penn State is the sort of easy team to eliminate from this, though they don't have a huge amount of distance on them. So Penn State probably gets eliminated. Then we're looking at this, and this followed by this would be the guess. Would not be at all surprised, though, to see this happen and go the other way. So this becomes a pretty interesting group. Then we move on to our last group. Preston says, if it's actually shown that these two teams intentionally lost early matches, they're supposed to be banned by rulebook. Okay, I think that's going to be hard to prove. I think that's going to be especially hard to prove for one of them who had kind of reasonable matches. I don't really think, but kind of reasonable matches. Let me check. So they had New York Ultraviolets and Michigan in their first rounds, and if memory serves, those are like 7-3 and 6-4 teams. This team then finished 8-2, but those teams aren't like JV squads. Those teams aren't like 3.2 squads. Those are somewhat real squads. They're not like 4-2 squads. They're not like, oh yeah, they were going to make it. They were going to be in the playoff squads. But those aren't inconceivable losses, especially if you were missing a player or something. So I doubt that that's going to come out, be proven. And ultimately, they're not going to make it into the playoffs because they're going to get eliminated. I think it's very likely by Maryville and Boise. Love the collegiate content. Keep up the good work. Happy to. Glad you're enjoying it. So now we move on to our last group here, and we see for our last group that we have 3 interesting teams. Utah here would be the expected winner, but we've also got Lords and SCAD. And actually, if we look at this, I'm not even sure we would consider Utah the expected winner anymore after we made our adjustment. No, we would not, and that actually fits in my mind. We would now expect SCAD, who have a really low seed, like a 27 seed or something, that's why they're in this group. We would now expect SCAD to be our winners here, followed by Lords, followed by Utah. This could go any way whatsoever. I really can't tell you with this group. UC Rolled can definitely catch you off guard if you're not ready for this team. They could be a bit challenging for some of these squads. I would not be surprised if UC Rolled took maps before teams figured them out. Decide what you will off of that. I'm not going to spoil their strategies or anything like that. This is Riverside, by the way. Um, I would not at all be surprised if these guys took maps or even if they beat someone. I would be surprised if they actually made it in, though, to the top two in their group. So I don't think they'll be able to pull that off. Could really be anyone in this group. This is probably the most interesting group right here. Not because it's like the absolute highest level group. It doesn't have probably as much power in it as this group with UC Irvine and Bellevue. This is probably the more powerful group over here. And then Converse, another very solid team. But SCAD, very good team over here, as well as Lords, very, solid team, and Utah, very solid team. So this is probably the most interesting group to my eye. Again, not because it's the absolute best group when we run our full averages, though it's a pretty decent one. But in terms of, hey, there's three teams and it's really tough to call who would win. So we've got some more interesting and some more boring groups. Once again, going through here just with our sort of interesting versus boring groups, I would probably put group 4 as an interesting group. I'd probably put group 3 as an interesting group. Then we're going to put this as an interesting group. Really, three teams in here. A little tough to call. Super boring group right here. And then these. So we've got pretty interesting groups. I don't think we have a true group of death. Oh my goodness, there's 4 of the best teams, 4 great teams, or there's 3 top 10 teams or anything like that in the same group. Fortunately, that didn't really happen to any of these groups because we have our 8 groups here. But we do have quite a few groups where it's like, hey, there's 3 pretty good teams in here, and maybe the second and third team are pretty similar to each other, that sort of thing. So we got ourselves about 5 interesting groups and 3 probably less interesting groups, and that's how I look at this. If you guys agree, disagree, let me know in chat. Let me know in the comments below. You can call me out and say, no, Temporal, you're being a homer. Group 2 is much more contested than you think, or UCLA is definitely going to take down Santa Cruz. Group 1 is where it's at. You can tell me that, or you can tell me, no, Ohio State stumbled, but they're cleanly going to put everyone away, and this will be a Harrisburg, Ohio group. It's not that interesting. Do what you want, definitely in the comments. Let me know what you're thinking. Other than that, if you guys are enjoying the content, please do drop a like, consider subscribing if you haven't already done so, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks.